What did you do when you found out the anniversary gift your husband gave you was actually intended for his mistress? I gave them both a night they'd never forget. On our 10-year anniversary, Rhys handed me a beautifully wrapped box of perfume as a gift at dinner. It took me back because he knew strong scents made me dizzy and nauseous. But still, the perfume was classy and in small amounts smelled great. So, I was thankful until later that night while he was in the shower, his phone lit up. It was a text from a woman named Maxine. "Oh, Rhys, you're so naughty," followed by the shy monkey emoji. Excuse me, what? I immediately unlocked his phone and saw exactly what she was referring to. Just 20 minutes earlier, Rhys had texted her, "I got my wife your perfume so I can smell you around the house." My stomach turned. I read it 3 more times just to be sure I wasn't misunderstanding. But there it was, clear as day, along with flirty messages and pictures that even I'd never received. My heart physically hurt as I scrolled through parts where they mocked me, calling me easy to manipulate, laughing about how Rhys wanted to be with her, but found the thrill of not getting caught too exciting to give up. I glanced at the perfume bottle on the nightstand. Tears in my eyes. If they wanted a thrill, they were going to get one, because perfume is flammable. But first, I had to drive Rhys crazy. The next morning, I sprayed just a tiny bit of the perfume on my wrists and neck. His face lit up instantly. "You're actually wearing it." "I love how it smells," he said, kissing my cheek. He had no idea what was coming. Soon, I began casually mentioning places he'd taken his mistress. "Have you tried that pasta place downtown?" I'd ask while planning dinner. Or I was thinking of lunch at Julio's cafe. Every time, Rhys's coffee would nearly spill. Never heard of those," he'd lie, squirming in his seat. The next day, I brought him a pamphlet. "I was thinking of getting my nails done at this salon. What do you think?" It was Maxine's workplace. He stared, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "You've never liked that place. Would you really go there?" he asked carefully. I shrugged. "Maybe one day, but not today." He exhaled in relief, but then came the real fun. We were at his parents' house for dinner, and I was wearing that perfume when his mom mentioned wanting grandchildren someday. I smiled and turned to Rhys. "You know, if we ever have a daughter, I've always loved the name Maxine." The soda nearly slipped from his hand. He coughed, stammering that he preferred other names, but his mom said Maxine was lovely. "What made you think of it?" she asked. Rhys looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, wondering if I knew. I just smiled. It's a name that's hard to forget. So unique. After that night, Rhys's paranoia grew worse. He started watching me constantly, panicking any time I mentioned anything even close to Maxine's name. He was so stressed he started smoking, just like she did. His messages to her showed how anxious he'd become. I thought this would end the affair, that he'd lose us both. But I was wrong. Rhys announced he had a work trip coming up on the same day as Maxine's birthday. Perfect. The night before, I did my research and found the hotel they were staying at, one of those shady places that still allowed smoking in rooms. Instead of confronting him, I helped him pack, folding his shirts neatly like the perfect wife. Then, without him knowing, I sprayed the flammable perfume everywhere, on his shirts, jacket, even his ties. He laughed when he came in to grab the suitcase. "Honey, you've practically marinated my wardrobe." I smiled. "So you can smell me even when you're away." That was the last time I saw him like that. Because at 2 a.m. I got the call. "Hello, is this Rhys's wife?" "This is a nurse from Halter's General Hospital. Your husband's been in an accident." My heart raced. When I arrived, breathless and teary, I begged, "Where is he? Where's my husband?" They led me to a room full of doctors and officers. One of them pulled me aside. "There was a fire in the room," he said. "Apparently, a cigarette your husband was smoking set his clothes on fire." I gasped. How could that even happen? The officer frowned. His clothes had traces of flammable perfume. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but it looks like your husband was having an affair. We found the same perfume bottle in the woman's makeup bag. We suspect she planned it, but got caught in the fire too." I stayed by his side, playing the devastated wife. When Rhys finally woke up, confused and in pain, I said nothing. I just took out the small perfume bottle and sprayed it around his bed. "So, honey," I whispered, leaning close about Maxine. His eyes went wide. I kept spraying the perfume in slow circles around his bed, watching panic spread across his burned face like I was the ghost he could never escape. His breathing quickened, and sweat started forming on his forehead even though the room was cold. He tried to say something, but his voice cracked and came out as a faint squeak. The scent of perfume filled the air, and I watched the realization hit him, what I was doing, spraying the same fragrance that had caused all this pain, turning it into a twisted reminder. A doctor suddenly burst through the door and shouted at me to stop. He grabbed the perfume bottle from my hand and ordered a nurse to escort me out. Instantly, I switched my expression to shock and concern, tears filling my eyes as I apologized over and over. I told them I only wanted him to smell something familiar from home, that I never meant to upset him. The nurse took my arm gently and guided me toward the hallway while I kept glancing back at Reese with a worried look. He was staring at me in pure terror, and I knew he finally understood everything. Outside, the head nurse introduced herself as Honoria Giles and led me into a small consultation room. She had kind eyes and spoke softly as she explained that Reese had second-degree burns covering 30% of his body, mostly on his torso and arms where his shirt had caught fire first. The pain was severe, and he'd need weeks of treatment and likely skin grafts. Then she paused and told me that Maxine was in even worse condition. The burns on her face and hands were devastating because she'd tried to put out the flames with her bare hands. Honoria said Maxine would need multiple surgeries, and the scarring would be permanent. I made myself look devastated and asked if they were both going to recover. She nodded, saying yes, but their lives would never be the same. I covered my face with my hands, pretending to cry, but in truth, I felt nothing except cold satisfaction hearing about their suffering. I spent the next few hours in the waiting room, playing the role of the heartbroken wife perfectly. I sat in those hard plastic chairs with my hands folded in my lap, staring at the floor as if in shock. My mind kept replaying every detail of my plan, checking for anything I might have missed. Did I leave evidence? Could they trace the perfume back to me? Would Reese tell them what I'd done? As word spread, more people arrived, Reese's brother first, then some cousins I barely knew. Finally, Geneva showed up, rushing to hug me while sobbing into my shoulder. "My poor baby, my poor son, how could this happen?" she cried. I rubbed her back, murmuring comforting words while silently thinking about how she'd raised a cheater and a liar. She pulled back, searching my face for something, and I made sure all she saw was worry and confusion. We sat together, holding hands, her tears soaking tissues while I played the perfect daughter-in-law. Inside, I wanted to tell her the truth about her precious son. Around 11 that night, a detective approached me. He introduced himself as Marius Giles and said he needed to ask some questions about the incident. I stood and followed him to a quiet corner, keeping my face calm and cooperative. He asked about Reese's trip, and I explained it was a work conference in another city. I told him I'd helped pack his suitcase, folding his clothes carefully so he'd look professional. The detective wrote everything down, then asked why Maxine was at the same hotel. I let confusion show on my face. I said I had no idea who she was or why she'd be there with my husband. He studied me closely, watching for any sign of deceit. I added that maybe she was a coworker attending the same conference, trying to sound helpful and innocent. He nodded slowly, but kept his eyes fixed on me. The questions started simple, timeline, travel plans, but then shifted. He asked specifically about the perfume. Did I know it was flammable? My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression puzzled and shook my head. I told him I had no idea, that it was just regular perfume. He asked where it came from, and I said Reese had given it to me as an anniversary gift a couple of weeks ago. I could see him thinking it over as he made notes. Then he asked if I'd sprayed any on his clothes while packing. I hesitated just long enough before saying maybe a little, so he could smell me while he was away. My voice cracked slightly, perfect for the part of the loving, worried wife. The detective thanked me and said he might have more questions later. I nodded and returned to the waiting room, my heart pounding though my face stayed calm. I finally left the hospital around 3 a.m. after they told me Reese was stable and asleep. The drive home felt strange, too quiet, too still, like the world was holding its breath. My hands wouldn't stop shaking on the steering wheel. The streets were empty and dark, and I couldn't stop seeing Reese's burned arms in my mind. The satisfaction I'd felt earlier was fading, replaced by the heavy realization of what I'd done. He could have died. Maxine might still die. I'd caused this. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for 10 minutes, staring at the house. Inside, I went straight to the trash, digging until I found the perfume box. On the back, in tiny print, were warnings about flammability and open flames. My heart pounded. I'd ignored it. I tossed the box into the fireplace and watched it burn, the warnings turning to ash. Then I washed my hands over and over, trying to scrub away the guilt. I barely slept and called my mom, Rita, at dawn. She drove 3 hours and arrived by 9, wrapping me in a hug the moment I opened the door. This time, I cried for real. She held me until I could breathe again, then gently asked what happened. I told her everything. The anniversary perfume, the messages, the affair, the fire. Her face shifted from shock to anger. She couldn't believe Reese would betray me after 10 years of marriage. Then she looked at me differently, like she was seeing someone she didn't quite recognize, and asked how I was holding up. I didn't know what to say. Rita insisted on taking me back to the hospital around noon. The smell of disinfectant and burnt fabric hit me as soon as we entered. At the nurse's station, a tall man turned toward us, Reese's brother, Caleb. He introduced himself, offered condolences, and led me to a quiet corner. He said Reese had confessed everything that morning, about Maxine, the affair, all of it. I kept my face calm even as my stomach dropped. Caleb said it had been going on for 8 months, that Maxine thought he'd leave me, and the birthday trip was supposed to be when he finally told her he wouldn't. Caleb said Reese only liked the excitement, the thrill of not getting caught. His disgust was obvious. I wiped my eyes and thanked him for being honest. A woman in a dark blazer approached, introducing herself as Sarah Morrow from the Fire Investigation Unit. Detective Giles, the same officer from last night, joined her. They asked if I could answer a few questions, and I agreed. In a small conference room, Sarah showed me photos of the hotel room, burned clothes, and the perfume bottle found in Maxine's bag. She asked about my knowledge of flammable materials. I stuck to my story. No, I didn't know perfume could be dangerous. She asked if I ever read warning labels. I said I usually threw the boxes away. Giles leaned forward and asked about my chemistry background. Never good at science, I replied, forcing a nervous smile. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Why spray so much perfume when strong scents make you sick? She asked. I told her I just wanted Reese to smell nice and think of me while he was away. They both watched me closely, then thanked me for my time. Out in the hallway, Rita was waiting. A doctor met us, explaining that Maxine had stabilized but would need several surgeries. Her burns were severe, especially on her hands and face. Reese's recovery was faster, second-degree burns, but with likely scarring and nerve damage. I nodded, playing the worried wife. Rita and I went to the cafeteria for sandwiches, but Geneva found us there. Her eyes were red, her jaw tight. She pulled me aside and demanded to know if I caused the fire. I denied it, but she pressed on, saying my weird comments about Maxine and those restaurants suddenly made sense. I lied again, saying I'd only learned of the affair at the hospital. She stared for a long moment, then walked away. After lunch, Rita left for home, promising to return tomorrow. Once she was gone, I slipped into Reese's room alone. He looked up, voice rough, asking if I knew what would happen. I smiled and told him we'd talk when he felt better. His eyes went wide, but I just patted his leg and walked out. 3 days passed in a blur of hospital visits and pretending everything was fine. On the 4th morning, Detective Giles called, asking me to come in for a formal interview. My stomach dropped. I called Rita, who gave me the number for a lawyer, Ardmia Hanley. She met me at the station, calm and professional, warning me to answer carefully. Inside the interview room, Giles placed Reese's phone on the table and began scrolling through messages, the ones where Reese told Maxine about the perfume, and mine showing every subtle move I'd made. My blood ran cold. They'd been building a case against me the whole time. Artemisia placed a hand on my arm and asked the officers to leave. Once we were alone, she said flatly that I was under investigation for reckless endangerment and possibly attempted murder. The text showed I knew about the affair and had created dangerous conditions on purpose. Then she asked if I knew the perfume was flammable. I couldn't answer. She tapped her pen, then quietly asked if I understood attorney-client privilege. I nodded. She told me she couldn't defend me if I lied. After a long silence, I admitted I knew the perfume had alcohol in it and had seen the warning labels. Her face didn't change. She simply told the officers we needed more time. Detective Giles gave us 15 minutes. Artemisia leaned in and said I had two options: cooperate now or end up in prison when they proved I was lying. She asked what I'd wanted when I sprayed Reese's clothes. I said I wanted him to suffer like I was suffering and for Maxine to understand what she'd done. She noted that wasn't the same as intending to start a fire, then asked if I'd planned one. I shook my head because I hadn't. I just knew the perfume was dangerous near cigarettes. She believed me enough to work with it. When the interview resumed, she did most of the talking, arguing I'd acted out of emotional distress. Giles looked doubtful but let me go after 2 hours, warning me not to leave town. Outside, Rita was waiting. She drove me home silently, sensing I couldn't talk. When we arrived, Geneva's car was parked in front, along with a few family vehicles. My stomach dropped. Inside, Geneva was directing Reese's relatives as they carried boxes to a truck. She turned when she saw me and said I had some nerve showing up after what I'd done. When I asked what was happening, she laughed bitterly, said they were Reese's things, not mine. The police had told them everything. She called me sick and promised everyone would know it. Then she banned me from the hospital and said she'd have me arrested if I tried to see him again. I didn't argue. I just stood there as they emptied the house. Caleb appeared, holding a box of Reese's books. He said he'd stayed behind to talk. I asked if he was there to condemn me too, but he shook his head. He said he understood why I'd done it, though it didn't make it right. Reese had ruined our marriage, but I'd gone too far. He said Reese would live with scars forever. Maxine might never look the same, and I'd have to live with that. Before leaving, he told me he hoped I'd find peace, but couldn't be around me anymore. When he left, I sat alone in the quiet house until Rita came back in, pretending everything was normal. The next morning, my phone started buzzing with messages from people I barely knew. The local news picked up the hotel fire story. I read the article and felt sick. It called the fire a tragic accident. A married man and his companion severely burned after his clothes caught fire from a cigarette. Investigators were still determining how his clothes became soaked in flammable perfume. They didn't name me, but anyone who knew us would figure it out. Within hours, my neighbor came by, offering sympathy and prayers. Another stopped me outside, saying she couldn't believe what Reese had done and calling me brave for standing by him. I wanted to scream that I wasn't brave, that I'd caused it, but I just smiled. The guilt and paranoia became unbearable. I stopped answering the door and kept the curtains closed. 3 days later, Artemisia came to my house. She spread out papers across the kitchen table and explained the prosecution's case. They claimed I deliberately created dangerous conditions, knowing Reese smoked near the perfume-soaked clothes. They were considering attempted murder if they could prove intent. My hands shook as she showed me the evidence: texts, search history, witness statements. It all looked damning on paper. She asked what I'd really been thinking when I sprayed his clothes. This time I told her the truth. I wanted him to think of me while he was with her. I knew the perfume was flammable, but I hadn't thought through what that meant. I'd wanted something bad to happen, not necessarily a fire. Artemisia listened quietly, then said my honesty was protected and I should never repeat it to anyone else. Our defense would be based on recklessness, not intent, emotional distress, not premeditation. She asked if I could stand by that in court. I nodded. Before leaving, she warned things would get worse before they got better. Media, Reese's family, public opinion. I promised to stay quiet. After she left, I sat staring at the coffee stains on the table, wondering how my life had come to this point. 2 days later, a man named Perry Mack called, an insurance investigator. His tone was polite but suspicious. I told him I'd check with my lawyer before meeting. Artemisia arranged it at her office. At the meeting, Perry had photos and detailed questions about the perfume, Reese's smoking, and my knowledge of its flammability. Artemisia answered most of them, keeping me brief. When he asked if I knew Reese smoked, I said yes, recently. He pressed if it concerned me. I said, of course, for his health. His look said he didn't buy it. Before leaving, he reminded me that insurance fraud was a serious crime. That night, Artemisia called with worse news. Maxine's family planned to sue me for her injuries. Even if the criminal charges didn't stick, the civil case could ruin me. She said they'd likely seek hundreds of thousands for medical bills, pain, and suffering. I didn't have that kind of money. Artemisia said Maxine's family could take my house, car, even the divorce settlement. I felt trapped, realizing I could lose everything, even if I avoided prison. She promised to negotiate but told me to prepare for the worst. That night, I lay awake doing the math of what my life would look like buried in debt. The revenge that once felt satisfying now felt like poison. The next afternoon, Rita came over to help with the boxes Geneva's family had left. I was in the garage when she suddenly called my name, her voice tight. Inside, she was standing in my office, holding my laptop. On the screen was my search history, flammable perfumes, hotels that allowed smoking, alcohol content, and fire risks.